They said the canine was broken, too aggressive, too unpredictable, and beyond saving. Every handler who tried to train him gave up, until a little boy walked into the station. He couldn't see, but somehow he understood. The moment the blind child reached out and whispered a single word, the raging dog instantly went silent and gently bowed his head, then did something no one could explain. The officers froze. What had he said? When they discovered the truth behind that single word and who the boy really was, and the entire station was left in tears. Stay till the end, because what this dog did next will leave you shocked. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The metal doors of the police training compound clanged shut, echoing across the concrete walls. Inside the fenced yard, officers stood in a tight semicircle, eyes fixed on a single German shepherd straining against his leash. His name was Rex, and a dog once bred for precision, loyalty, and obedience. But what they saw now was chaos. Foam flecked his mouth as he barked wildly, claws scraping the ground. Every command was ignored. Every attempt at control only seemed to enrage him more. "Back off!" one handler shouted, stumbling as Rex lunged again, teeth snapping inches from his arm. Two other officers grabbed the line, struggling to hold him. The air vibrated with tension, fear mixed with frustration. Rex had failed 3 consecutive training trials. He'd bitten 2 handlers, destroyed equipment, and refused every signal. The trainers whispered that he was unfit for service. Others called him something worse, a danger. Behind the chain-link fence, Officer Mark Jensen watched in silence. He'd seen aggressive dogs before, but something about Rex felt different. Not mindless rage, but pain disguised as defiance. The way the dog's eyes darted, searching, almost pleading, struck him deeply, but the chief's voice cut through his thoughts. "Enough. He's untrainable. We can't risk another injury." Mark's jaw tightened as Rex was dragged back into his cage, still growling. Around him, the room buzzed with murmurs of failure. But as the gate slammed shut, Mark couldn't shake the feeling. This dog wasn't dangerous. He was hurting. The next morning, the corridors of the precinct were unusually silent. A thin sheet of paper lay on the chief's desk, stamped and signed. It carried only one line that mattered. K-9 17, termination approved. Officer Mark stood by the door, disbelief tightening his chest. "Sir, there has to be another way," he pleaded quietly. The chief sighed, removing his glasses. "We've given that dog every chance. He's attacked 2 trainers. Insurance won't cover another incident." Through the small glass window, Mark could see Rex pacing restlessly in his kennel, muscles taut, eyes burning with confusion. He wasn't a monster. He was misunderstood, but no one else seemed to see it. A junior officer walked in, folder in hand. "Transport scheduled for Friday," he said, avoiding eye contact. Mark felt the words hit like a blow. Friday, just 3 days left. As he walked past Rex's cage, the dog met his gaze, fierce yet strangely pleading. For a moment, the chaos faded, replaced by something raw and human. Mark swallowed hard, whispering under his breath, "I'm not giving up on you," but deep down, he knew time was running out, and no one was listening. Rain pattered against the glass as Officer Mark Jensen stood outside the chief's office, rehearsing his words. He knew it was pointless. Decisions like this were rarely reversed, but something inside him refused to stay silent. He knocked once and entered, clutching a thin file filled with Rex's records. "Sir, I'm asking for one last chance," Mark began, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "Rex isn't broken, he's scared. Look at his early evaluations. He passed every obedience test before his handler transfer." The chief leaned back in his chair, expression weary. "You've seen the reports? He's unpredictable, dangerous. I can't risk another officer's life for a dog that can't be trusted." Mark placed a photo on the desk, Rex sitting proudly beside his original handler, tail wagging, eyes alert. "That's not a killer, sir. Something changed after his partner died. Maybe he just needs someone who understands him again." The chief's silence stretched. Outside, thunder rumbled low, mirroring the tension in the room. Finally, he sighed. "You've got until Friday morning. Prove he's worth saving." Mark nodded, relief and fear twisting together. As he stepped into the dim hallway, he looked toward the kennels. Rex was there, restless, waiting. "All right, buddy," he whispered, determination hardening his voice. "It's you and me now. We're not done yet." Friday morning dawned gray and quiet, the kind of day that carried a heaviness no one could name. The officers moved through their routines with subdued energy, avoiding the kennel wing where Rex was held. Everyone knew what the afternoon held, and no one wanted to talk about it. But fate had other plans. Just before noon, a cheerful voice echoed down the corridor. "The community kids are here for the station tour," a receptionist called out. Mark looked up, surprised. A group of young children entered, holding hands and laughing, escorted by 2 teachers. Their bright chatter felt wildly out of place among the solemn officers. Then Mark noticed one boy lagging slightly behind, small, with sandy hair and dark glasses. He held a white cane in one hand, tapping gently along the floor. The teacher leaned down to adjust his sleeve. "It's okay, Ethan," she said softly. "We'll walk slowly." Mark smiled faintly. He had seen blind children visit before, curious, brave, full of questions. But when Ethan turned his head toward the sound of barking echoing from the kennels, something changed. His face tilted upward as if sensing something no one else could, and that's when Rex began to bark, wildly, uncontrollably, as if calling for someone. The children froze as Rex's ferocious barking thundered through the hallway. Teachers gasped, pulling the group back instinctively. "Stay behind the line," one officer shouted, moving to block the view of the kennel. The air vibrated with the sound of claws raking against steel, but Ethan didn't move. The blind boy stood still, his head tilted toward the noise. "Who is that?" he asked softly. Mark hesitated, stepping closer. "That's Rex," he said. "A police dog?" "Not a friendly one." Ethan's brow furrowed. "He sounds scared," he murmured. Those 3 words made Mark pause. No one had ever described Rex that way before. Ignoring the adults' protests, Ethan took a small, careful step forward. The tapping of his cane echoed across the concrete floor. "Son, stop right there," an officer warned, panic rising. But the boy kept moving, guided not by sight but by sound and by instinct. Rex's growls deepened, a raw warning that made everyone tense. Yet Ethan didn't flinch. He slowly knelt near the gate, his small hands trembling as they hovered near the bars. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered. Mark's heart pounded. One wrong move and it could all end horribly. But something strange happened. Rex stopped. The barking died mid-growl. The room fell into a silence so deep it felt sacred. And in that stillness, for the first time in months, Rex didn't look like a monster. He looked lost, and the boy had just found him. The entire room stood frozen. Officers, teachers, and children holding their breath as Ethan remained kneeling by the kennel. His small hand rested just inches from the cold metal bars. Rex's chest heaved, muscles tense, a low rumble still vibrating in his throat. One wrong sound could send him lunging again, but Ethan didn't retreat. His head tilted slightly, listening to the rhythm of Rex's breathing. Then in a calm, trembling voice, he whispered a single word. No one caught it. It was soft, almost like a secret carried on a sigh. But Rex heard it. The change was instant, electric. The dog's ears twitched, his body froze, and his tail lowered. His growl faded into a faint whimper. Slowly, almost cautiously, Rex stepped forward, pressing his nose against the bars. Gasps filled the air. Mark instinctively reached for his holster, ready to pull the boy away, but stopped when he saw what was happening. Rex's entire demeanor had changed. The fierce canine that no one could control now sat quietly, eyes locked on Ethan, his tail tapping gently against the floor. Ethan smiled faintly, his small hand finally touching the dog's muzzle through the bars. "There you are," he whispered again. Mark's throat tightened. Something incredible had just happened, something no training manual could explain. For the first time, Rex wasn't fighting commands or resisting control. He was responding to a boy who couldn't even see him. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and Rex's quiet breathing. Officers who had once labeled him dangerous now stood rooted to the floor, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Rex, the same dog who had snapped at seasoned trainers, who had been marked for euthanasia, now sat perfectly calm before a blind child. His eyes, once wild with aggression, had softened into something almost human. Mark's heart pounded as he took a cautious step closer. "Ethan, what did you say to him?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan turned his face toward the sound, smiling softly. "Just his name," he said, "but not the one you call him." Rex shifted slightly, pressing his muzzle closer to the bars, releasing a low whine. Not of anger, but longing. The boy reached out again, and this time Rex licked his hand gently. A murmur spread through the officers. Some raised their phones to record. Others simply stared in disbelief. Mark swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know what just happened," he murmured, "but that dog just remembered something." And deep down, he knew. This was only the beginning. That night, long after the visitors had gone and the station lights dimmed, Mark sat at his desk replaying the moment in his head. The image of Rex sitting calmly before the blind boy wouldn't leave him. That one whispered word had transformed chaos into peace. But why? He found Ethan's teacher's contact number and asked if he could visit. The next afternoon, Mark met them at a small community center. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, petting a therapy dog with gentle, confident hands. He looked up when he heard Mark's boots. "You came," he said with a smile. Mark knelt beside him. "Ethan, yesterday at the station, when you whispered to Rex, what did you say?" The boy hesitated, tracing his fingers along the dog's fur. "It was just a word my dad used to say," he murmured. "He told me it means stay calm, I'm here." He used to say it to his dog every night before bed." Mark frowned. "Your dad, was he a police officer?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, Officer Daniel Hayes. He worked with a K-9 before the accident." His voice faltered, the weight of loss heavy in the room. Mark's pulse quickened. The name felt like a ghost from the past. He rushed back to the precinct, rummaging through old records until he found it. K-917 Handler, Officer Daniel Hayes. He froze, staring at the page. Rex wasn't just some uncontrollable dog. He was that K-9, the one who'd lost his partner in the line of duty. The whispered word hadn't been magic. It was memory, a link to a bond that death couldn't break. Mark stared at the file in disbelief, the edges trembling in his hands. Every report, every photograph, every training record pointed to one truth. Rex had once belonged to Officer Daniel Hayes, Ethan's father. The same man whose loss had left both his son and his dog adrift in silence. He sank into his chair, heart pounding. All this time they'd thought Rex was untrainable, dangerous, but what if he had just been grieving? The attacks, the aggression, the endless defiance. It wasn't rebellion. It was heartbreak. Mark flipped through the records again, stopping at an old training note. Responds best to calm verbal reassurance. Keyword, solace. His eyes widened. That was it. That was the word Ethan had whispered. He pressed his palms against the desk, realizing the enormity of what had happened. The dog hadn't responded to orders. He'd responded to love remembered. Mark's throat tightened as he whispered the word aloud. Solace. It felt heavy, sacred, almost alive. Somehow, across years and loss, a blind boy had unknowingly spoken the same word his father used, rekindling a bond between man and dog that even death couldn't erase. For the first time, Mark understood. Rex didn't need retraining. He needed reconnection, and now there was only one person who could give him that. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the station windows, casting soft gold across the floor. Mark stood by Rex's kennel, file in hand, heart heavy with what he knew. He had called Ethan's teacher earlier, asking if the boy could visit again. This time not as part of a tour, but for something far more important. When Ethan arrived, cane in hand, Rex's reaction was immediate. The dog tensed, ears pricking, tail slowly lowering as if he could sense the boy before hearing him. Mark unlocked the gate cautiously, ready to intervene, but Rex didn't lunge or bark. He stepped forward quietly, almost reverently. Ethan smiled faintly. He remembers, he whispered. Then kneeling, he reached out both hands. Rex pressed his head against the boy's chest, releasing a soft, trembling whine that filled the entire room with silence. Mark swallowed hard, the sight almost too much to take in. This was no training moment. This was recognition. Two souls finding each other through grief and instinct. Ethan's fingers traced along Rex's collar, his voice barely a breath. "You were his partner, weren't you?" Rex whimpered as if answering. Tears blurred Mark's vision as he turned away, his throat tightening. For the first time in months, Rex wasn't an uncontrollable beast. He was home again, beside the only piece of his old partner left in the world. Training began the next day, not with orders, not with shouting, but with patience. Mark opened the gate and stepped into the training yard, his heart pounding. Rex stood alert, eyes fixed on him, tail stiff with uncertainty. Ethan sat nearby, listening to every sound, his small hands resting calmly on his knees. "All right, boy," Mark said softly, crouching to meet Rex's gaze. "Let's try this again." But this time Ethan's voice joined in, gentle, steady. "Solace," he whispered. The word carried through the cold morning air like a promise. Rex froze for a heartbeat, then lowered his head and moved forward. Slowly, carefully, he obeyed. Mark's pulse surged. For the first time in months, the commands flowed smoothly. Sit, stay, heel. Each one was followed, not perfectly, but willingly. Days turned into weeks. Every session, Ethan sat nearby, whispering that same word whenever Rex's anxiety surfaced. It became their shared rhythm. Trust built one breath at a time. The officers who had once mocked Mark's hope now gathered at the edge of the yard, watching in quiet awe. Rex, once labeled uncontrollable, was responding again, not to force but to faith. Mark smiled, pride shining through exhaustion. "You're not a lost cause, partner," he whispered, resting a hand on Rex's neck. "You just needed someone to believe in you." 2 months later, the day of reckoning arrived. The department had agreed to give Rex one final test, a live field exercise that would determine his future once and for all. The training yard buzzed with tension as officers gathered to watch. Mark adjusted his vest, heart pounding. "You ready, partner?" he whispered. Rex stood tall beside him, eyes focused, tail steady. No growl, no hesitation, only alert, poised calm. Across the field, an officer planted a decoy scent trail through a maze of crates and vehicles. The challenge was designed to expose any flaw, hesitation, aggression, or confusion. Mark gave the signal. "Find." Rex shot forward, nose low, body weaving through obstacles with precision. Every movement was clean, deliberate, confident. When he found the target, he barked once, and sharp, controlled, perfect. The field fell silent. Then came the applause. The chief turned to Mark, astonished. "That's the same dog?" Mark nodded, pride shining through his grin. "No, sir. That's the same heart." Finally understood. And just beyond the fence, Ethan sat listening, smiling as Rex's barks echoed across the field. The sound of redemption finally complete. A month later, the precinct gathered in the courtyard under a clear blue sky. The morning sun glinted off polished badges as officers stood in a semicircle around a small podium. On it sat a gleaming plaque. K9 Officer Rex, reinstated to active duty. Mark stood tall beside Rex, who wore his vest again for the first time, the word "police" stitched proudly across it. His stance was confident, his eyes calm. No trace of the wild, broken dog from months ago remained. The chief stepped forward, smiling for the first time in a long while. "Sometimes," he said, voice steady, "it's not training that saves a soul, it's understanding." The crowd erupted in applause. Rex barked once, sharp and proud, tail wagging. Then Mark turned to the small figure standing near the front. Ethan, holding his white cane, smiling faintly in the sunlight. "This one's for you, kid," Mark said softly. As the officers saluted, Rex walked over to Ethan and sat beside him, his head resting gently against the boy's leg. For a moment, no one spoke. The world seemed still, united by the silent bond between a once-broken dog and the boy who healed him. When the ceremony ended, the crowd began to disperse, but Ethan remained where he was, his hand resting gently on Rex's head. The German shepherd sat tall beside him, ears alert yet calm, as if waiting for something unspoken. Mark approached quietly. "He's yours as much as ours now," he said softly. Ethan smiled, his unseeing eyes glimmering in the afternoon light. "Can I tell him one more thing?" Mark nodded. Ethan knelt down, both hands cupping Rex's face. The dog's breathing slowed. His gaze locked on the boy as if understanding every heartbeat between them. Then in a whisper barely louder than the breeze, Ethan said the word again. "Solace." Rex exhaled, his tail swaying gently. The moment felt timeless. The dog leaned forward, pressing his nose to Ethan's chest before letting out a soft whine, not of pain, but peace. Around them, even the officers fell silent, feeling the quiet power of that connection. Mark blinked away the sting in his eyes. It wasn't just a command anymore. It was a promise, one word, two souls, and a bond that would never fade. Weeks passed, but the memory of that day never faded. Rex and Mark returned to active duty, working side by side on rescue operations and patrols. Yet no matter how tough the mission, one thing remained constant. Before every task, Mark would glance at Rex and whisper the same word Ethan had taught them, solace. And every time, the dog's ears would perk up, his body steady, his eyes calm, as if the spirit of his first handler still guided him. Ethan visited often, his laughter filling the precinct halls. Rex would rush to greet him, tail wagging, sitting quietly beside the boy who had saved his soul. The officers who once doubted him now told his story with pride, of a dog once deemed uncontrollable, who found peace through a blind child's heart. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Mark looked at them and smiled. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the ones we think are broken just need someone to understand their pain." Rex rested his head on Ethan's lap, eyes closed, content, and as the screen fades, the narrator's voice carries the final words. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales that prove love needs no words.